All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sohail, and here I am to present to you our very own podcast called the Mindful Podcast. And we've recorded our first episode, and we recorded it with a hypnotherapist based in Dubai. She's called Hifza Jilani, and I've had an amazing conversation with her around hypnotherapy and a bit of spirituality. It was quite interesting. Like while I was in conversation with her, it was quite a calming effect that I experienced. She's ways layers deeper than I could imagine her to be. So it was a beautiful conversation. So I encourage you to sit back, make yourself some green tea or some coffee, relax and enjoy this podcast because I assure you it'll definitely have some sort of impact on your life. So stay tuned for the upcoming podcast and show some love to the Mindful Podcast.
When the client comes, we ask them what is the presenting issue. The client tells us the presenting issue, okay, my job is a mess and I hate my job. And that could stem from an inner child experience that happened when the father said, okay, no, you're just wasting your time. Don't do all this drawing and all. I want you to be good at math. And that's sort of like stuck around with the person and they became an engineer. We are part of a society where there's a lot of gender stigmas and there's a lot of gender complexities where a girl will not feel safe with a male hypnotherapist. So a lot of people, they will talk about, I had a vision in my dream and this thing happened. Of course, your subconscious knows what's going to happen. Your mind needs to just sort of like let it be. It doesn't have to find the logic in everything. So that's why we say that we are the gods of our own realities because.
But I really like how you beautifully sort of explain the entire process of the inner child. Right, we're on now. So, Hifza, welcome to our Mindful podcast today. I'd like to sort of welcome you. You're the first guest on the podcast right here. So, we'll just start with how have you been doing and how's life been for you?
Thank you so much, Sohail, for inviting me. And it's I'm pleased that I'm the first sort of guest on your podcast. It's really I think it's an honor personally. And about life, I think alive and happy as much as we can be, right?
That's
How about
right.
you? How are things with you? How's life with you?
Life is good. I've been shelving the idea of doing the podcast like how we were talking about it initially before recording. So I'm
Yes.
so happy that I've been finally able to sort of, put it on stage now. And I'm really looking forward to the conversations that I'm going to have during this podcast. So it's great to be here. We'll see how we go.
Yes, so excited.
Great. So let's dive in to the questions if you're ready for it.
Yes, yes.
All right. So I do understand that you're a hypnotherapist. Can you tell me and our viewers more about hypnotherapy? And if someone wants to choose that modality for their healing, what would that look like for them, Hifsa? Because there's a lot of fugazi around hypnotherapy, right? And it'll be really good to sort of really understand it for what it is. So, but yeah, how would you describe hypnotherapy in your perspective?
Okay, first things first. Yes, of course, you're right. There is a lot of misconception around hypnosis, and it's also because of stage hypnosis, which got a lot of fame and a lot of attention and a lot of popularity. But to be fairly honest, we're very like the modality that I have studied in is fairly very similar to what psychotherapy is, but the only difference is that we are working beyond the inner child. So, of course, most of the sessions are on inner child, and that's what most of the psychotherapists do as well. But we sort of like tap onto the unconscious and look into the complexities of the mind. How has the mind sort of understood a certain experience? Let's say a person went through an experience where the mother felt, okay, I should not have this. this ingredient in the food. Let's say the mother is pregnant and she had this thought, and the child gets strange allergy with that certain ingredient.
Mm-hmm.
It's as crazy as it can be, but that's our mind. Like mind has it doesn't have a science to it. Of course it does, but I don't mean to say that science, but it doesn't have any logic when it comes to things that are sort of like wrapped around layers and layers. It's like there's an onion and you just keep layering it in. That's how a human mind works, and that's how a personality or a human life works. And that's what where we come in. Like, of course, psychotherapists also does the same kind of work, but it stops with the inner child. And I mean, like, that's how most of the psychologists all over the world, they stop with the inner child. And of course, there's so much to do with the inner child, because most of our experiences are kind of locked in from that time period. When we come in, we step a little bit further. We go into the prenatal phase where the mother, I mean, you're in the mother's womb, and we also look at your life afterwards. Like, what was your life plan when you got on Earth? Are you from another land? Are you from another alien sort of planet? So all these things sort of, because like some people, they come to you and they're like, I felt alienated all my life, I feel like I'm lonely. And you keep working on the inner child, and there comes a point where you're like, okay, this person is not healing from this idea. Even if it's an idea, let's say for a moment, for the logic of the world, let's say, okay, hypothetically, that we do not know that a foreign land or a foreign planet exists, and this person or this soul is from that land. But we're just gonna be like, okay, this person has an idea. We don't know if that idea is coming from movies, we don't know that idea is coming from their parents or the media.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know where that thought is coming from. But if the person truly believes they do not belong on Mother Earth, there is no fix to that unless you unwrap that. Where is that thought coming from? And if that person believes they were living the avatar life in their blue planet, and they were like, it's totally in sync with the world, they were totally in sync with their heart, like with their emotions, and blah blah blah, and then suddenly they're on Earth and the vibration is so low. And I mean, it kind of makes sense also, because Earth is a very heavy and very dense planet. It has a lot of weight to it. There's a lot of mass, there's a lot of matter to it, which pulls it sort of down. And yeah, I mean, I'm just going here and there. But so basically, what we do is, when the client comes, we ask them, what is the presenting issue? The client tells us the presenting issue. Okay, my job is a mess and I hate my job. That's what the
Mm-hmm.
client will say. And we'll take that case as the presenting issue, as the presenting problem, and then we'll kind of like layer and find out that the core was actually about them not feeling appreciated in life. And that could stem from an inner child experience that happened when the father said, okay, no, you're just wasting your time, don't do all this drawing and all, I want you to be good at math. And
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of like stuck around with the person, and they became an engineer. But deep down, that there was an artist living, right? So that kind of polarity is where we come in, and we sort of like fix that dilemma for the client. And yeah, then I mean, there are many techniques that we use, but it's mainly taking that person in deep trance, and sort of like letting the person talk in that trance, because your subconscious never lies. Conscious mind
Mm.
can pretend and fake it up, but the subconscious cannot lie. It has to be like a story, right? So it's all about putting the puzzle in places. I hope I made sense. I don't know. I just went on and on about this. Yes,
No,
Sohail.
absolutely. You make a lot of sense. And I think, you sort of touched a part of me while you were talking about it when you said, this person goes on becoming an engineer, but he's an artist, right? And that's what I do. So I studied engineering. It's so funny that you've just talked about it, Hifza. And I think my belief in hypnotherapy is already kicking in. And I'm sure my viewers and our viewers here might be having a good time here listening to you too. So I think let's sort of talk a bit more about that moment of trance that you've mentioned, right? So how does that really work? Because I think, There's, like how we said, there's a lot of stigma around hypnotherapy and how efficient it is to be able to actually tap into the unconscious, right? So talk a bit more about how do you create that environment where people can actually go into a space where they're operating from a space of unconscious, because it's an art, right? And it's really difficult to be able to do so. And it sounds like the work that you people do is, a layer deeper than what we do in psychotherapy, right? So we definitely work with the inner child, and all working with self-compassion and everything. But I do find it quite limiting in many ways, right? So help me understand that moment of trance and what does it look like for a client, let's say, walking into your practice?
Wonderful. I think you just broke it down for me. You made it much easier for me to like sort of like put a picture here. And the picture is like, as you said, like, when a client comes to you, you create that safe space for them. You maybe having a plant in the office or wherever you're practicing, and you have a candle or I mean, if your client prefers light, dim lighting, you have that. Like it's all about the environment and creating that space for the client. And of course, before we step into the trance, there's like a few cognitive sessions where you sit down with the client, you ask about their life, about their family history, to know the nitty gritties. Like, let's say they're in trance and you say a word that triggers them, it's not going to
Mm,
work.
mm,
So you have to make sure that the client feels safe. You have to ask again and again, I mean, is it okay if I touch you? Is it okay if I snap my fingers? Because a lot of people, surprisingly, a lot of women I've had sessions with, some when they were children, they experienced this snapping as sort of like a very triggering experience. So for such people, you come up with another strategy. So of course, like it's all like textbookish, just like all other modalities in the world. We follow a basic protocol, and that is to get the client ready, because I mean, no matter how good your art is, if the client is not ready and they don't believe in it and they don't want to lose control, I mean, you may not be able to do so. So
mm,
there's very thin line between mind control and hypnotherapy, and that's where the stigma comes in, right? Because at the end of the day, you are letting in, you are going in with the therapist, you are just letting becoming vulnerable at the deepest you can be. So, of course, it goes without saying that the protocol and the rapport, the trust between the therapist and the client, I mean, it has to be there. Then, of course, it's all about the art of using the right words and, of course, the voice. A lot of people tell me, I mean, some of my colleagues and people in the same community tell me that your voice is so good. And I mean, like, a lot of teachers have told me as well. And I'm like, it's not like your voice, there's anything wrong with your voices, but it's just like, you have that depth. So even with other therapists, even if they don't have that deeper sort of vocal cords, they kind of like use that. Okay, I want you to close your eyes slowly. One. So these kind of up and down in the voice sort of invites the client in that space. Okay, I can relax. So it's like meditation, but it's like you're doing sessions in those meditations, like just like you are doing the sessions. Okay, what happened? Open the door. And there are moments when the client is like, I can't open the door. It's my classroom where my teacher told me to stand up in front of the whole class. I cannot go inside. So there are moments
mm,
where the client just goes inside an experience without us even directing them or without us even telling them, okay, I want you to find out when this pain occurred, or I want you to find out when you felt lack of love for the first time. So it's not like
mm,
we're giving them those like scenarios or those commands, as you may call them technically. But sometimes the client goes and chooses the exact file that needs to be healed and resolved in that session.
mm. It's quite interesting, Hifza, just how you describe it. I was listening to this podcaster, and he does talk about, his ayahuasca experience, right, with psychedelics and how he went into trauma healing. And it's funny how
Ah,
it sounds so similar in a way where the client almost gives that power to the clinician, right, to be able to take them where they're ready to go. And you've mentioned around the readiness to therapy, right? So, can you talk a bit more about how important is it to get the client ready, right? So, if I talk for myself and if I had to walk through a hypnotherapist's room, I'd be terrified, quite literally, because I think a part of me would be very defensive to be able to just, just allow the other person to have access to my world all of a sudden, right? So, and I'm sure a lot of people out there might feel the same way. So, talk a bit more about that trust, right? And how crucial it is to be able to establish that trust before getting into that moment of trance, let's say.
Yes. See, if the client is does not feel safe with you, that is one thing that needs to be. I mean, it has to be there. That is a deal break. It's a deal break. If it's not there,
Mm,
it's a deal breaker. If the client does not feel safe with you, and it goes in all other modalities as well, especially in hypnotherapy, you will not be able to take that client in the trance. That client will not go into trance if that client does not feel safe with you. And it usually happens, I mean, because we are part of a society where there's a lot of gender um, stigmas and there's a lot of gender complexities where a girl will not feel safe with a male hypnotherapist
mm,
and
mm,
a male client may not feel very good with the female therapist, and it goes hand in hand sort of in such a weird way that like that gender complexity thing is something that needs to be discussed and
mm,
surely spoken about, um, because if the client is not feeling safe, that client will not go into trance. The second part, which I mean, you touched upon, is that the feeling of losing control. That is
mm,
when
mm,
therapy begins. All therapy begins there, because at the end of the day, we talk about how grown up we are adults, we're mature, but at the same time our shell has become more and more stronger. The harder the
mm,
shell is, the deeper the inner world is, right? So that's why we have this shell around us, and it's not just you. I mean, honestly, it's all of us. It's me. It's everyone. Nobody wants to be like out there and just tell me that my mother doesn't love me. Who wants
mm,
to? I mean, you spend years with a client getting them on that point, right? For a psychotherapist, it takes them maybe like a few sessions for the client to finally admit that I have a problem with my mother.
mhm,
So in the subconscious world, you will just go there because that file is related to your presenting problem, or it even may not be related because that is what needs to be healed. Your mind, see, what is subconscious mind? Subconscious mind is the 80% of us, which is
mhm,
deep, which is hidden, and nobody has access to that, not even us. We can't access our subconscious unless we remember our dreams, and we are those people who do lucid dreamers. Even they
mhm,
sort of like go into a different reality, they create that. So a lot of people, they will talk about, I had a vision in my dream and this thing happened. Of course, your subconscious knows what's going to happen. That's why it didn't predict it. It just saw it because the subconscious knows the future, the present, and the past.
wow,
So I am
mm,
not the healer. The subconscious is the healer of the person. So to make them
mm,
understand why subconscious mind has all the secrets, not just your secrets, it will have secrets of the entire universe, and which is why there's a whole school of thought that actually believes in the power of the past lives, and why past lives need to be healed is because the subconscious has stored all the information, all the data of many years. So I mean, interestingly, when we come into the metaphysical hypnotherapy, we say that the subconscious mind is does not die. That's the way we kind of understand things to help ourselves so that we don't lose our minds, right? Because this is too much. So the subconscious mind doesn't die, but the soul dies. I mean, technically kind of goes away to another dimension. So the subconscious mind stays. So if let's say there is a fear of um, aeroplanes, and that person's life purpose or that person's destiny or the bigger picture, which we don't see but the higher powers do, was that was to overcome that fear. I mean, because he that person could not do that, the subconscious will kind of like linger on. So because see, let's go back to Carl Jung's
Mhm.
collective conscious and uncollective conscious.
I
So
do
the
want to,
uncollective,
sorry, I'm
yes,
cutting you off there. I do want to acknowledge I'm
yes,
a big fan of Carl Jung, so I'm
yes.
loving what you're gonna say already. So go on.
So Carl Jung's very famous hypothesis was that there is a collective conscious and then there is the uncollective conscious. So what? So the collective consciousness is definitely something that we all kind of feel, that we all are kind of connected to. It's like a matrix. But the uncollective unconscious is basically the subconscious of all of us. That is the collective. So which is why, I mean, there's a part of the brain that has sort of like primitive memory, so we can access the files of people who probably walked on earth for the first time. So that it's that primitive. I mean, when we do the theory of mind, when we look at the conscious and the subconscious, in the subconscious itself there is the primitive memory. So of
Hmm.
course we have the memories of our childhood, we have the memories of our probably prenatal experiences when we were in the mother's womb, but we also have experiences or memories or impressions and imprints from our ancestors or even the ones before them. So it does get very complicated when it comes down to what kind of problems do we choose. So the
Mm.
problem that I may have chosen may also be a problem of my grandmother, let's say, or my great great grandfather. So it kind of like we kind of inherit causes and issues and problems that we have to deal with. And I'm sure it's something that more and more people are realizing now finally, that we are so connected with our past and our ancestors. Anyway, I went again sort of
No,
like I don't know.
it's lovely. That's the exact purpose of the podcast, really, Hifsa, to have these conversations where, you know, that would actually blow your mind, right? So I think for me, just to be listening to you right now, it does make me realize how little that I know about, human mind, right, and human conditioning, and just the worlds beyond it, right, and sort of sparks that curious side of me to learn a bit more about it. You did mention around dreams, right? And that's uh, one of the things that is not talked about much in the world of therapy. So let's say if people are sort of deploying cognitive behavioral therapy, it's sort of surface level work that we see that's done today, right? So talk a bit more about your understanding of dreams, right? And how can you sort of explain it to our viewer today has no information about, let's say, psychology? How would you
Yeah.
try to explain dreams, and how would you connect it to the unconscious mind?
Okay. So our mind has attention span of about 20 minutes. And that is the attention span that we have. I mean, if I have to speak to you right now, that is my attention span. My whole focus and energy is here. But then there's so much that my mind may not be aware of right now, because it's definitely an overload on the mind. There's too much going on, there's too much information. So the subconscious mind sort of like stores everything. It is the
Hmm.
memory drive that our processor has. So it stores everything throughout the day. I mean, if we go back to our days, also because we do a lot of mindfulness and a lot of work on ourselves, maybe we'd be in a better position to talk about our days. But any layman, if I ask them, do you remember like the entire picture of your day, every moment, every thought? That person will be like, it's impossible. I won't
Mm.
remember all that. Maybe I did this, maybe I did that, maybe I thought about this. He or she will just remember the maybe the themes, or maybe just one or two or five things. So there's definitely an overload of information throughout the day. We have access to subconscious, we have access to social media, We have access to film, we have access to our relationships. So there's a lot of information coming in from work and everywhere. So when we sleep, and that is the only time our conscious mind tells us that okay, it's time to sleep, but our subconscious mind never sleeps, right? And that's when it sort of like takes the active role in our lives, and the subconscious mind is passive. So when people talk about remembering their dreams, is because a part of them, a part of their consciousness, or a part of their conscious mind sort of wakes up in that moment. So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of like gels in together. So, I mean,
Mm,
it's like a nature's process of helping us help ourselves. It's the
mm,
nature's process of sort of like summarizing everything that happened in the day and sort of like storing it where it needs to be stored. Sometimes it
mm.
happens perfectly, but sometimes it happens in a very weird way.
That's right. I think I can sort of really relate to the explanation that you give right now. So I think if I do sort of draw in from my experiences of dreaming, right? I think I've had experiences where if I wanted to say something to someone, but I couldn't have, like, for some reasons, in the real world, I've said it in the realms of my dream, right? And I've said it exactly how I wanted to say it. And just the last bit of what you said was the deal breaker almost for me, where you said sometimes you just say it how as it is, but sometimes you say it in a manner which doesn't really make sense, right? And I think that's where you're sort of talking about the symbols and the objects and just the funny things that would happen in the dream. So how would a person, this is the curious side of me, how how does a layman who, like, who's watching this podcast, how do they create sense out of their dreams that doesn't make sense? What could be some of the steps that they can take to be able to really start to understand their unconscious mind, or the message their unconscious mind is giving to them?
Hmm.
Mm,
Hmm. Very good. I mean, and this is actually one of the techniques that we use. It's dream therapy, and I'm glad that we spoke about this. And there's metaphor therapy as well. So what happens in the dream is that we have, like, let's say, all my life. I'll give an example for the layman to understand, because when two intellectuals sit together, all they'll talk about is intellect. So, so I'll give an example that when I was growing up, I used to dream a lot about snakes, and I approached. I told my mother, I told everyone around me that I keep watching snakes. All my dreams are all about snakes. So everyone told me, okay, there are two enemies in your life. And as a kid, you're like, what enemies do I have? Like, and then other people would tell me, okay, I had this spiritual dream. And I'm like, my dreams are such, I mean, there's sometimes murders happening in them. There is something wrong with me. And then I grew up, and of course, when you start researching and you start studying, when I got into this path, and I realized that that particular snake meant something for me. That
mm,
snake did not mean jealousy or envy or like being under threat. It actually meant that a transformation is on the way. And that's what snakes are symbolically. They are all about transformation, healing, dying, and then being born again. So it's like a proper rebirthing experience. And since I actually identified that okay, for me snake is about my spiritual journey, and that's when I started dreaming about snakes more. And this time it got
mm,
even better and I felt better. So it was just an example to spark your creativity that, like it can be something so stupid, something so like it would not make a lot of sense to another person. But when it
mm,
comes to you, it makes a whole lot of sense. And it doesn't, your dreams don't have to make sense to anyone or to your logic also. Your
mm-hmm.
dream.
Or to your therapist too sometimes. I think a lot of times when people do talk about their dreams, they do ask me, do you understand what I'm saying? Because it's really difficult for them to really understand what they're talking about. And I
Yeah.
sort of keep reminding my clients, it's not for me to understand, right? It's for you to understand.
Yes.
And it's for me to try to understand the narrative right there. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. You see, I mean, they will come to you and they will come to you and they will tell you that, okay, I saw this. What does this mean? Is there a danger that will happen in my life? No, there is no danger in your life. Maybe you witness something. And also, like when we're dreaming, we visit many different, frequencies and different dimensions, and maybe even, like it's just something as random as it can be. But then
Yeah.
again, because
Mm,
it's so deep and it's so connected with your subconscious mind, whatever it's whatever is being played, it has some sort of significance in your conscious world, and it will definitely would have done its part. So without your
mm,
acknowledgement or with your acknowledgement, but as you said, how can you make this better? How can you sort of make this dream part of you, or this dream therapy something significant in your life, is by keeping a journal next to your bed, and whenever you wake up, just write down whatever symbols you saw, whatever things you saw, what you felt.
mm,
So, I mean, Carl Jung has a lot of symbols and metaphors for all these things in dreams. But then again, as you said, that it's not always the case. Sometimes it can mean something else to someone else, but it could also mean something else to someone else. But it's just this that your mind needs to just sort of like let it be. It doesn't have to find the logic in everything. When
that's
we try and
right.
find logic in everything, that's when we go further and further and further away from our true selves. I
That's
mean,
right. And
I know I
but
was sounded very
mhm.
controversial.
Uh,
I love logic. I mean, I just for clarification, I think that we are very logical beings, and we
mhm,
should be logical. We should think about processes, ideas, thoughts, and inspirations, and stories, and this and that. But then again, like when it comes to our own inner growth and inner sort of worlds, not everything needs to be sort of like understood and analyzed.
mm,
The more we understand and analyze, the more we form judgments, and the more we form judgments, the more hypnotherapy shall apply. So just to give you a gist of this, so how does this work? That when a child is born, from 0 to 7 to 8, that's when
mhm,
the most crucial time is, right? But we say in our world that when a child is 9, that's when all the experiences, all the belief systems, everything has been sort of like done. So after 9, the critical filter will be formed. And that critical filter is what? All the conditioning that we've gone through.
mhm,
So after the critical filter is formed, um, your life will be based on that critical filter. So let's say when I was a young girl, I felt that, okay, men are dangerous beings and men are to be scared about. So all my life, with or without, I will attract situations where I will be sort of in places where I will kind of reaffirm that feeling. So that's why we say that we are the gods of our own realities, because we sort of whatever is stored in our heads at that time, that critical filter is formed. So the religious upbringing, the social conditioning, the schools, the parenting, everything that kind of overloads us with information is set here. So when a client comes to us, we work with a critical filter, that okay, this happened because of this, and you don't want this to be a part of your life. Like a 14-year-old will come, sorry, she was 14 when her father left her, and she
mm,
will come and she will say that I'm in relationships, and all the boys that I'm going out with, after some time, after a month or two, they suddenly do not see me, and I'm kind of surprised. Why? What do you mean they don't see you? They just stop noticing me. They just stop bothering to talk. Like it's just like I'm not there. So I'm like,
mm,
okay, let's work on this. Let's figure this out. And when you tap onto that layer of consciousness, you find out that that 14-year-old girl was on the way to her home, and her father had gone, and she could not see her father. And immediately the little child sort of like like sent this signal to the conscious mind or the subconscious mind that okay,
mm,
men don't see me. you know,
mm,
something or the other. It doesn't have to be very black and white. It's a very subtle impression in the
mm,
mind, and that sort of like creates what we call fate or destiny, and sort of like we think that okay, life happens to me, not for me, because we are not aware of half the information that's stored up there, you know.
mm.
So
That's
yes.
right. It's quite beautiful how you sort of illustrate that inner child, right? And in my
Yes.
practice too, I do focus a lot on the inner child work because there's a lot of wounding that the
Yes.
adult carries, right? And I think I do want to acknowledge while we speak, I do want to acknowledge the inner child sitting right here too in our conversation. I usually talk to my clients and tell them that, there's four of us in the room, right? There's a little me and there's a little you sort of in conversation too. So I think just a gentle acknowledgement of that little one right now to be able to just show some compassion. But I really like how you beautifully sort of explain the entire process of the inner child work. And it sounds quite, a part of me makes me wonder, like, how do you do all of that without getting, let's say, burnt out, right? Because if you're sort of tapping into all these different realms of, human mind and human consciousness, or the unconscious mind and the universe, how do you sort of preserve yourself in the process? Because every person who comes in definitely carries a part of you with them. And every person that comes in gives you a part of them to you, right? So, talk a bit more about that process of self preservation. How do you sort of take care of yourself in the process of that?
Yes, that's a wonderful question, and I'm amazed how much you go so deep in things. That's amazing. So we have this practice where before the client comes in, we sort of like shield our mind and our bodies, especially energy bodies, and it's a very simple process where. I just close my eyes and I just kind of like breathe a certain way for 7 times to ground myself, and then 7 times again to connect with my higher self. So when I'm working, there, like I tell myself again and again, anything that triggers me, anything that makes me judge the person should not affect the work. The client, this space is for client. I am a nobody. I am just a
Mm.
channel of whatever. I'm a mediator.
And I
And
do,
then when the
sorry, I'm cutting you off there, Hifza. I do want to, because this one of my questions sort of revolves around what you've just said. So I'll come back to that later on. I'm just sort of putting a mental note for you and me. If I do forget, do remind me. I do want to sort of dive a little deep into it. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Mm,
So the next phase of this, when the client, I mean, goes, and at that time you feel, see, there are some clients that are, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced a variety of clients. So there are some clients, there's a group A and then there's group B. So the group A is very light. They kind of come there and they're very ready. They're telling you, okay, I did this, I did that. They're, the type A personalities, or you can say that they get you and you get them. It's very
mhm,
simple, it's very easy. It's not, there's no resistance in the client. They're very ready to, sort of like work on themselves. They'll remember what you told them the previous session, and they will just, think about it and tell you, okay, I thought about this, I thought about that. So that first group is, I would say that they're very light. Energetically, you feel very motivated when you see them. And after
mhm,
they're gone, you're like happy. You're like, okay, I did good.
mhm,
Because no matter what, as therapists, we get involved. No matter how many, sort of cleansings and this and that I do, at the end of the day, I am affected by their well-being. But at the
mm,
end of the day, their well-being is their responsibility, not mine. So if I have done the exact same thing with another person, and the other person will not have gotten it, there's nothing wrong with the way I've done or dealt with the client. It's just that they may not be ready, or their higher self knows better, or maybe this is not their path right now, or
mm,
maybe it could be anything. maybe that person is not the client for me, you know. So the clients that are for me will come to me, and I don't have to worry about their state of being or their, I mean, there was a time I used to be very concerned, and I would have myself completely 24/7 available to my clients. They could call me at 12 a.m. at 1 a.m. And I was like, you know, okay, I'm compassionate and empathetic, but that doesn't mean that I'm just, like taken advantage of, or I'm just like walked all over. Because at the end of
Mm,
the day, we are giving them 100% when they are with us. So there's no obligation for us to be with them whenever they need, quote, I need you. There's nothing, there's no such thing as I need you. You need yourself. I'm just here to highlight that path for you. I'm not the driver, I'm not the car. I'm just the GPS, the map navigator. I'll just help
mm,
you with the directions. I don't have to sit and drive for you and take you XYZ, and then, it's just doesn't work where either the client gets too clingy or you get too invested. So there has to be established boundaries with the client and with the therapist. It goes both ways, of course. So after the client walks out, as I was saying, the second group is the one that kind of like depletes you. Either their problems bother you, or you're like, we have gone over this million of times, and then
mm,
this person is just not. So either you'll get frustrated, or you get like, okay, is there something wrong today? I mean, what did I do wrong? Or you'd start worrying about their lives, or you'd start thinking about their, and it goes without saying, we are sort of like always analyzing people, right? So, and in that moment you're like, okay, the client has gone, he has left my space, and in my life there needs to be just me right now,
mm,
and I need to focus on my life. So sort of like kind of like cutting yourself off. So we have these kind of as you said, energy. So we kind of like do this energy exchange in our heads as well, and I'm sure anybody can do that. It's not just that, okay, we have like certain copyrights to that. So it's like basic, I mean, you and I can do it as well, and it's basically just any judgments or any vibrations between us that may or may not be healthy, or even sort of I don't know how to put this, but like basically any energy that does not belong to me, and
mm,
any energy that does not belong to you, that may have come through me or come through you. I mean, of course, then there comes the point where, okay, what if I shared an energy of connection? But then you're like, okay, but how much connection can you have with a person, right? So there
mm,
also, like, you shut it out. You're like, okay, there's total humiliation. I love and respect this person. I accept this person as they are, but there's nothing beyond that. But there's nothing, I mean, this person is their own power, is their own sort of individual. I can't kind of like mesh or influence them or direct them or control them. So this kind of like understanding of the other person and sort of like cutting this energy exchange can be very phenomenal. Just in your head, you are just, and it may work with for the other person as well because you already did it.
mhm,
So there's no such
mhm,
thing as one-sided connection or one-sided energy lingering. So as long as you're like, okay, this person has left, and I call on all my energies that this person took from me, and I give away anything and everything that belongs to this person and doesn't belong to you. So any judgment, any perception, any negativity. So for example, you and I may not have any problems, right? We just spoke, and we've had a wonderful connection. We're vibing together. So let's say I remind you of someone from your life experiences, or maybe just randomly anyone. So that may cause sort of like lagging in our connection. So when you do the energy exchange where you cut the cord of any such dramatics, so it will be more neutral. It will be more as is should be. So yes, I don't know. I just went on and on again.
mm. All right. So I think the next question that I have for you, Hifza, is around spirituality, right? Because I think a lot of in answering my questions, a lot of times you did sort of went into the realms of spirituality. Talk a bit more about spirituality and what does it really mean from your perspective?
That's a very simple question, but it has a lot of complex answers. But I'll try to simplify it as much as I can. See, there's a lot of it's the world is right now on a spiritual, let's say, upgradation. Everyone is talking about it, which I feel it's very good, but at the same
Mhm,
time it has a lot of misconceptions, and the word itself is so complex. Because of that, the misconceptions are also very complex. So I mean, there are upsides to it, that of course many people are talking about it, many people are kind of going towards it, but then it kind of like separates us from the reality, and which is what I want to discuss here. Of course, on the other spectrum, where my beliefs or my personal stance on spirituality is, and then comes in the picture of other people and how they project spirituality and what
mhm,
they think spirituality is. So to be fair and square, spirituality is nothing complicated. It's as simple as finding that inner peace. It's just having that inner sense of understanding of the world. That's just the basic, like kind of foundation to spirituality. And then of course you can have multiple viewpoints, multiple belief systems there. But in today's world, spirituality is also mired with a lot of misconceptions, and people think that being spiritual, you would just be a perfect human being, or you
mm,
would, they think that being spiritual means that you will not have opinions. They think that being spiritual would make you somewhat angelic, which is absolutely not possible. And we are not
mm,
trying to transcend the vibration that we're on. Of course, we are becoming more evolved and more understanding of the other, but at the same time, that does not mean that to be spiritual, I need to do everything for free. I would just, offer myself to the service of humanity, and I would just, not think about my own personal needs or my own personal life. So I think this is where the modern spirituality comes in, where we are talking about, working on yourself, self-consciousness, awareness, understanding, working on yourself, being a perfect example, if not the perfect human being or an angelic figure, but to be a perfect example of how a person should behave. And how a person should behave in that holistic sense is when they're not causing harm to the other person, they're respecting the other person equally. And like it's very complicated, and I would love to hear your opinion on it as well, so that I can, like come in and make fun of it, and kind of make jokes just to prove your point.
mm.
Yes.
It's quite, I think it's quite a subjective topic, really. I think, just the idea of spirituality, to me is being authentic to myself and who I am, really. And that's where it starts from. And I think for me, it's more about, I mean, understanding there is self, right? But also understanding the concept of holism, right? So if there's another person in pain, how
Hmm.
am I sort of connected to that person, right? Or if I, let's say, if I see a bird chirping, right, how do I interact with that bird while that bird sort of chirps? So I think for me, it's more around sort of exploring the realms of it. I'm very far from sort of calling myself a spiritual person, but I think, I really like that path because it keeps me centered and it keeps me grounded and it makes me who I am to the core, really. So, and I did want to ask you, like, because with the humbleness that you explain the work that you do, right? A lot of times I've seen spiritual figures, right, or people who work with spirituality. There's a concept around spiritual superiority, okay?
Hmm.
And we've seen that all around media to, people who practice spirituality as a practice or as a method of healing. Talk a bit more about that, Hifsa. What do you think about this notion of this spiritual person, coming from a place of power and dominance, right? Where the expectation is that a normal person is going to sort of almost, bow in front of them, right? Talk a bit more about that. What is this, thing around spiritual superiority, really? What's your take on this?
Yes, and wonderfully explained, by the way. So, I mean, see, this is not anything that has just come up or surfaced up in the society. We've seen this over centuries. When you look back in time, there are all sorts of gurus and spiritual teachers
Mhm,
who have adorned themselves with the idea of supernatural powers, and it's almost as if they're I mean, they try to portray this image that they are perfect, which is again something that we can debate on, something that we can always sort of inspire to become. But at the end of the day, like you said, spirituality is all about being centered and being here in the now. Like you said, the bird is chirping, just going in that experience. So that's all there is to spirituality. It has nothing to do with what I can do or what I may have done in my life. It's not about the choices that I make. Of course, being an evolved human being, you would make the right choices. But then again, what is right and wrong? So then
mm,
again, like creating a perception around spirituality or spiritual figures is absolutely wrong. And it kind of alienates people. It sort of like separates people from the higher
uh-huh,
power and from the source, because you're creating this image that I am the channel to the higher power and you are a nobody, you are nothing. So that sort of idea or projection can hurt the person and can make them go far and far away. They'll be like, okay, I'll just not believe in all this and I'll just follow whatever there is, right? So with spirituality, of course, there is some kind of fantasy attached to it, with everything
mm-hmm,
else, just like everything else. But specifically with spirituality, I think there is this notion of, like you have to do this to be a spiritual person, or you must be doing or saying this to be spiritual, you must be dressing like this to be spiritual. So at the end of the day, spirituality is all about acceptance, all about understanding, and as you said, all about being in that center in your core. So you're not far away from spirituality, let me tell you that. You're actually pretty much near spirituality as compared to many other people who would say, just because I read a few books, I am better. Or the idea that they have more power, or the thought that they are kind of better off than the other person is ultimately
mm,
wrong, and it has damaged not just spirituality but also the decorum of humanity. So when it comes down to the nitty gritty of spirituality, it's basically believing in a higher power and surrendering to that higher power, and also acknowledging your role in sort of making this world a reality. So it's not just
mm,
about,
mm,
okay, I'm just here and I'm going to bow down to the higher power and that power will do everything for me. I'll just close my eyes and manifest or pray and everything will come, rolling under my feet. No, it doesn't work like that. You if you
mm,
if you believe in something, if you really actually surrender to something, you will not just sit around with your hands closed, that okay, let it come to me. No, you will work towards it. So of course, with that comes in the dharmic action, that okay, my life is more than what I want it to be. My life has meaning, my life has purpose, my life has drive. So all of this kind of like encapsulates spirituality in its essence. But of course, I'm again, as you said, that you're also very new to this. I'm also very new, because I
mm,
mean, there can never be a limit to this, because the more you go deeper into this, the more you will drown in the sea of unknowingness. That's how it is.
mm.
And
That's
appreciating
right.
that
Now,
unknowingness.
that's right. Now, I really like how you explain it with such humbleness, right? And I think that's what it is refreshing for me right now to hear, right? For someone who actually sort of works with that modality, comes from a space of the ground, and not the sky. And it's quite refreshing to hear that narrative.
So tell me your
So thank
experience. Like, have you had any like weird sort of experience, or do you have? Because I can sense that there is something that has affected you and your take on spirituality or your take on people who practice spirituality. Because I can sense there is some sort of, like you feel that there is something that is not right about it. So what is that? Have
Yeah,
you
no, it's a
felt
good
that way?
question. It's a good question. It's basically inspired from one of the podcasts that I was actually watching around spirituality and just the
Okay.
idea and the narrative around, these gurus, right? And how they operate in their lives. And like how you said, it almost creates a disconnect with the concept of spirituality, right? And a lot of times a layman like me, let's say, would sort of really struggle to understand how to get to that level, right? Because if it's so unachievable, and if I have to disconnect to the world, in all the
Yes.
other levels, how do I even sort of get to that point? And I think it's really sort of refreshing to know that no, that's not the, I don't know
The
about right or
fantasy.
wrong.
Yes, yes,
That's
yes.
right. That's the fantasy. Absolutely. So, and I really like how you said it's not just regarding spirituality, but a lot of things. We human beings are obsessed with fantasizing about things, right? And I think, just the idea of this fantasy around the spiritual realm can be quite damaging for a lot of
Damn it.
people and can
Yes.
create that space for them. So, I do have an interesting question. So, you've said about quite a lot of things, right? And you're very knowledgeable. If I talk about it from my perspective, I've learned a lot right now just in this interaction from you. What inspired you to be a clinician, right? Or become a hypnotherapist? And you don't have to dive in, deeper into it if you don't feel comfortable. But
No, of
maybe
course.
sort of, help us understand because as a therapist or as a practitioner, we sort of operate from a space of our own wounds, right? And that's where it helps us create that sort of space, that safe space for other people. So, what brought you to this world, Hifsa?
So, long story cut short, I don't know how long it is, but since I was a child, I had this fascination, and as we were talking about the fantasy, I had this fantasy about like it was not in being something or doing something or being somewhere. It wasn't a longing sort of thing, but it was almost as if I was on like alert, like I would look at the moon and I would go like, okay, like that bewilderment where you're
Mm-hmm.
like that child that is just looking into everything like an earthworm. What is this earthworm doing? What is this butterfly doing? What is this plant? I was just lost in all this. And I mean, later on I realized that I was always I mean, out of all my siblings, I was very much into reading. I practically grew up on Harry Potter. So I would love to be alone. As a child, I would not talk a lot. I would not be very hyper or energetic. I would be energetic, but in the physical sense, but not like social. I wouldn't interact a lot with people. And I think, later on I was like, okay, I had a weird childhood and nobody actually, sort of approached and talked to me about this because, when we were growing up, all this mental health and all this was not understood or talked about. Later on, I started because I was the middle child. I had to, sort of like excel myself above and beyond, and sort of like, and not because there was this. Of course, I felt the pressure because I felt like I had to be seen and I wanted attention all to myself by my mother. So I worked really hard, and by default, or maybe it was because of the circumstances, but I kept, like studying and being the top student and all that. And while I was into all of this, I started noticing emotions and I started noticing, the realities of life and this and that. But I didn't get bothered by it too much as compared to. So when I talk about my journey, I would think that it was later, after my 25, that I started understanding, how relationships work, like how people talk but they don't mean it, things like that. All my life I thought, whatever you said, it was like, it was it. I wouldn't like second guess you or think about this. So everyone called me very naive and sometimes very blunt, like, she has no filter, she's just as it is. So I had a lot of trouble making myself or feeling myself understood, making myself. See, this is how deep it went. So I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I had to make people understand me. Anyways, all of this didn't bother me because I mean I was just on a roll and I felt like I was high the whole time on what I don't know. So, long story cut short again, I started working towards the dream of my father, who wanted us to become, join a certain profession, which was politics. And because he was a politician, I thought that, this is what's supposed to be. It's meant to be. This is destiny. This is my, path, and this is my calling. And I love studies. I love learning about things, about wars and violence. Really bothered me. Why are people weird? Why do people damage another person? Like, all these things were, of course, brewing up somewhere. Then I started. Oops. Yes. Then, when I started my undergrad, it was on Islamism, and that's when I realized that I had this deep, sort of inclination towards understanding Islam and towards understanding religion. Where is it coming from? Why do people say certain things? Like, like the things that nobody usually thinks about. It was all going in my head, and I would ask questions to my parents, and they would just, be like, okay, just don't think so much, don't talk so much. And my basic question was, why are there no women who are revered as prophets or revered as, like priestesses and things like that? And nobody gave me like a proper response. So I was like, okay, if there are just if it's just supposed to be men, like, why do I have an urge to understand this? Why, like, is there something wrong with me? All women are supposed to, think about guys and fantasies and the the fairy tale and home and this and that. And I was like, there is something wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't I belong to this category? So these were the questions that I sort of like started having, and without sharing too many details, but I'll tell you this much, that I started feeling like a failure, and this feeling came in out of nowhere and sudden, and it was not based on what was happening around me. It was coming from somewhere deep inside me, that okay, I need to, put a stop to this. So I've spent like around until I was 26, I can say. I From 21 to 26 I was working in journalism, and I was pretty good at it and I was doing well. But then something was missing. So then after my mother passed away, I had this chance to go back to school, and I picked up, rather than international relations, this time I picked up sociology. And in sociology, I picked up anthropology, and anthropology, I picked up the metaphysics, or how people understand religion. And this is where the drama begins, because I was like, okay, I am doing this for a reason, and because if my lineage is also sort of like into spirituality or whatever. So I was like, okay, I've been, like nobody has kind of carved this path for me. It's almost as if I have, like, it's laid out in front of me and I have to just step in that. So I started working on this thesis, and I went to my supervisor and I told her that I want to do it on women who have spiritual inclination. So all the studies, or all the uh, like all the knowledge that I'm getting, it's mostly like women who are practicing witchcraft or Wiccan or pagans. So, and that's where women have supernatural powers, and they're doing tarot cards, they're doing this, they're doing that. So my teacher
Mm-hmm.
looked at me and she's like, okay, well, you need to think about this again, you need to go back and revisit this. So I was like, why is she telling me revisit this? So she's like, okay, you have to, like, pick a subject. You have to, like, bring it down. I was like, there's no one around me that I can study. She's like, no, well, then she like slowly made me understand that Sufism is also pretty much similar to what you're saying. So I was like
Mm,
a little bit shocked there. I was like, okay, I did not go into this at all. Even though I knew about Sufism and this and that, but I was just like, okay, whatever. It is what it is. But because there was a lot of stigma around Sufism as well, and even in fact in my family, like educated people think about it like, oh, this is just kind of like BS. So when I studied about it, that's when, so the first one that I did was on spiritual women who got spiritual supernatural powers after going to this shrine, and there was a musical instrument, and they would heal depression, they would heal all their traumas by attending this ceremony. So I was like, okay, this is very interesting. And then the next, because there were two independent studies, the next one was on the sainthood, the idea of sainthood, and how it comes down
mhm,
in the ancestry. So I finished this, and just when I was finishing it, so just before that, briefly to let you know, I had started studying a little bit about numerology and astrology, a little bit, because I was struggling with life and I wouldn't understand my place in life. And I was like, okay, there is something weird. And I did try a lot of recreational, experiences. So I was like, okay, there
mhm,
is a world out there that needs to be explored. So when I finished my studies, I kind of enrolled myself in a diploma from US on astrology. And this is where, like I was like told by the universe, or something happened there. Because the teacher in my group, so they were like, they would divide all the students in seven, like per group, seven people. And the teacher, or the
mhm,
supervisor mentor that I was assigned to, was actually a woman from Colorado. She was a Christian woman, and like a white American woman. And when I she added me on Facebook, and we were talking about something, and then I just went to her profile, and I saw that her name is Habiba and Kabir. So I was like, okay. And then I saw
mm,
behind her there's a green flag with the kalma written on it. So I was like, okay. So I asked her, what's all this about? So she told me that I have joined Sufism for the past, I don't know how many years, and I've embraced Islam and this and that. So I was like, what? What just happened?
mm,
So this is when I was like, okay, I'm running from it, but it's running towards me. And then I was like, okay, enough is enough. I've been studying about women. I've been running around trying to find answers, but I think I should get into this. I should, like go out and get my certifications and maybe learn an energy healing modality. And surely this sort of MPhil program opened up my eyes, because of my teacher who pushed me to my questions. And rest is history. From there, I don't know when and how my life just completely transformed. And it was just that moment of,
mm,
when you realize your life purpose, and you're like, okay, I made it. So those 10 years of my life, I literally remember things, but I also don't remember things, because it was like all of it happened so
mm,
fast. So when I came in my 30s, I'm like, okay, finally, I'm home. So
mm.
yeah, in short, but of course there's a lot in between. But I tried to summarize it for you. But I think it sort of like gives you an understanding. Does it? I don't know.
Absolutely. I think just the purpose of this question was to sort of let the viewers know that all of the clinicians that we work alongside with, they do have their own sort of, wounds that would help them sort of come towards the goal. And I really like how you said, you did not pick that path. That
Yeah.
path almost sort of picked you, right? It followed you in many ways. And it's beautifully how describe what that journey looks like for you. So thank you, Hifza. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your
Yes.
honesty and humbleness during this conversation. So how was this conversation for you though, and how did you sort of feel during this conversation?
Can I be totally honest?
Absolutely, that's the idea.
Grounded, grounded but honest. So I'll be totally honest and grounded here as well, because I might get a little bit ungrounded when I talk. But I have felt a very, like, in layman terms, like a very strong, energetic vibe here, which sort of made me feel again very understood, very open and welcome. So I think it's all hats off to you, because you did not make me feel any in any way, like, it did not feel like I'm on a pedestal, neither did it feel like
Mhm.
I'm like you're questioning me and you're like finding something to argue on. Even if you had done it, it would have been fun. But I'm just saying that it was just such a heartwarming experience, because I think we both have a certain wavelength, and I think viewers can sense that too. Nobody can believe that this is the first time that we are kind of like interacting in
Mm,
person.
that's
Yes, it was
right.
wonderful, and I look forward to chatting with you again, and probably we can figure out some discussion or dialogue together again.
That's right. Now, thank you so much, Hifza, for your kind words. And it has been an absolute pleasure to be in conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.